Hello and welcome back, and once again it's time to talk about Jonsbo. This is a brand that I've had something of a love affair with over the years, and more precisely their range of NAS enclosures. If you do want to build your own NAS from scratch, there's a lot of things we have to keep in mind. We have to think about our motherboard, our CPUs, our cooling, our SSDs, our hard drives, and ultimately what all of that is going to live within. Now, the TLDR, this is a 9-bay NAS solution. That's 9 SATA storage bays there at the bottom, supporting MATX and ITX boards, supporting MATX boards, crucially not ATX motherboards, more on that later on. On top of that, it supports up to a total 9 individual fans to be installed inside, although it only arrives with 2 out of the gate. It also supports not only ATX PSUs and SFX PSUs, but it also supports dual PSU implementation for those that are scaling up and need more power, or those that want to have dedicated PSUs for things like graphics cards. Also, it has a front-mounted USB Type-C 10 gig port and a front-mounted USB Type-A 5 gig port, and it also supports up to 4 full-height, full-length PCIe cards. Now, pricing is going to be something of a mixed bag for some of you, because realistically it's not cheap, and at the same time at the moment you can only really get it at a really affordable level if you shop from somewhere like AliExpress, which unfortunately means having to knock around with things like delivery prices. That means that the price for this is somewhere between about $150 to $200. But then when you start looking at really sporadic pricing for delivery costs wherever you are in the world, you're really going to have to factor that in. You can shop on places like Amazon where it absorbs the price of the shipping, but that ultimately means you can be paying more at the outset anyway, or at least it merged into one giant price tag. So this is not a cheap case. It is cheaper than some of the market, and there are some older players, things like Fractal Design and things like their Node casing, which is still popular to this day. But at least in terms of a 9-bay solution, and we'll circle back to 9 later on, this is quite a unique little proposition. However, there are going to be users asking how exactly this new case compares against probably one of my favourite DIY NAS enclosures out there. This is the Jonsbo N5. Sorry, I haven't got the case on properly there. This is still my favourite. It's a 12-bay DIY NAS solution that supports everything. The sheer scale, the sheer amount of ventilation and cooling, for me, made it one of the best DIY NAS cases in the market. So the real question is going to be, is the N6 simply a different proposition, or is it a better proposition overall? First up, let's talk about the design. I still love it. I like Jonsbo's attitude towards building these. Again, although I know not everyone's in love with that nice little wood finish there, at least it's a neat little flourish they've added there. Measurements-wise, it is indeed smaller than the N5 there, but it's still not the smallest DIY NAS case, I would argue. Still at 9 bays of storage, and if you are going to be using more aggressive motherboards, it's still going to be appealing to you. Do keep in mind, I mentioned earlier on, inside this, I have already built this, by the way, and we'll be going through shots of that throughout the course of this video. But going for a board like this, obviously there's going to be absolutely buckets of room. I've gone for a CWWK board inside there. I'm using an MATX W680 board inside there. That's the dual 10 gig motherboard that we reviewed on the channel a while ago. But for those that are curious, you can't even get in a standard ATX board. If you're thinking of reusing one of these, it's actually really close. It's less than an inch difference in order to take advantage of that, but there's just, once you get it inside, for the spacing inside, even though there is just about enough space to install a standard ATX board, it's just too tight inside there. So again, ATX users, that's where your N5 is going to prove dividends. But there is an incredible amount of ventilation on this device, notwithstanding that top ventilated panel, which you can insert filters in if you choose. On top of that, you've got that removable, already pre-filtered front panel connected via magnets at the top, all the way through with ventilation, even when each of the bays is fully populated with a 3.5-inch hard drive. We'll get onto those trays later on. Either side of the device has a full panel ventilation there on either side, so both on the PCIe card and standard motherboard going into the cooling system. On the rear of the device, we've got even more ventilation all the way around alongside those 2 fans already pre-installed, 120mm fans. We have ventilation on the top. We've even got ventilation on the base there over where the PSU could sit. And speaking of where the CPU could sit, I mentioned earlier on about the dual PSU support here. This device supports both SFX and ATX PSUs, but you also have a decent amount of choice of where you're going to install it. Now I've gone ahead and installed it here on the top panel, here at the top, and there is actually a mounting bracket inside, and we'll come back to that later on, that allows me to install an ATX PSU inside. But you can even, using the included swappable panels, go ahead and install another PSU in this base by removing that fan. You can restate that fan in one of the other brackets, and you can put a PSU in there instead, or as well as. There's also an additional mounting bracket included over here that allows you to install the PSU in the top of the casing area as well. So there's a lot of different placements, but do keep in mind, and we'll come back to it in the build area later on, that cooling and the PSU choices do later on start to become problematic. That said, I will highlight, if you do choose to install the PSU in the front mounting area, this rear panel here actually has a cover that you can use if you don't have a PSU inside there, and it even arrives with an extension cable that can run from the front mounted SFX PSU all the way through, and has a push out there in the metal that allows you to still have the port connector there included. That's not the first time Jonsbo have done this, but I like that it's included in the accessory kit for that level of flexibility. Another neat little extra here is alongside the little LEDs there on that front mounted panel and the USB ports we already mentioned that feed in to some nice tightly managed F-panel cables internally, there's also fan control. It's weird that that's the first time we've seen physical fan control on a Jonsbo, given the majority of them arrive with the fan cables included and pre-attached PCB internally. We'll get to that in a sec. But there is a fan, and we'll go through noise later on in the video, but having that fan control is pretty neat. But it can't be set to 0. It can only be set to 1, 2, or 3. So if you were to try to utilize this just for the external fans and not use the onboard fan for something like your CPU, you're not going to be able to control that. But more precisely, again, you can't set it down to 0. Not everyone's going to do that on a 24/7, but it's just in case you wanted to know. Now we've got to talk about the bays, because good news, mostly, the system now arrives with trays. I know some of you that have never seen a Jonsbo before are probably wondering why that's good news. Jonsbo for a long time, as much as I loved their cases, I despised their tray mechanics. You had to attach rubber grommets to either sides of the drives, and then there was a rubber pull handle, which again reduced, when it was inside the SATA connector at the rear, you would pull it, and then after a while the drive might spring into your hand, potentially hitting that drive. So now they've finally gone to trays, but I will say these aren't the nicest trays. They are metal, it's a lovely bit of heat dissipation, and there is space allowance between each drive to ensure that you've got active airflow for the fans via passive ventilation. But still, I'm glad the trays are here, and they do support 2.5-inch drives, but they're not lockable, they're not kind of pull handled there, they don't have LEDs on them, hence why you've got the bank up there. So again, good news, bad news. And talking of those drives, all 9 bays feed onto a back-mounted PCB with individual SAS SATA connectors on this side of the PCB that these trays feed into. Unfortunately though, on the rear of that PCB, it doesn't feed out into SAS. There isn't a SAS, like a mini SAS external. It does feed out into traditional SATA connectors. There's also 2 SATA power and 2 PATA or Molex power as well. So it's nice you can use those, those connectors, but it's just a shame that that board doesn't support SAS drives. I haven't checked, at least in the last week or so, about whether Jonsbo will roll out an alternate board that does support SAS. That seems like an open goal if they don't, but it's not something they've really engaged with up to this point yet. Now, as mentioned, I have already built this device. I'm pondering whether to make a build video about it. Let me know in the comments if you'd like that. But mainly this has been one of the easiest Jonsbo builds I've ever done, to a point where I'm not certain a build video is actually needed for this one. The standard wire filtering all the way through, it's there. In terms of installation, it's probably been one of the most hand-holdy, and the instruction menu, which you can download as a PDF from their website, was really, really helpful. It guides all the way through to multiple PSU installations as well. I go through the good and the bad, I'll say straight away, alongside those very clear instructions, I will say that the cable routing inside is very, very straightforward. All of the cavities inside there for routing the cables are very, very clear. And although it doesn't arrive with the SATA cabling or anything included in the kit, if you go, in my case, I went for a motherboard that used SFF8643 connectors going into fan out, four for each connector, and I used 3 of those internally. It went through sweet as a nut. The spacing is there. Again, if you are going to use an MATX board, definitely route your cables first. But again, let us know if you do want to see a build video on that. So the cable routing was really, really good. The placement of the motherboard, although it went in nice and easy, you do have to remove the PSU bracket if you're going to be using the ATX PSU inside there, because it will make installing that motherboard a lot easier. On top of that, a lovely little thing I noticed, and I know this isn't for everyone, by the way, there's no more using hex or Allen keys on this, something that really bugs me with previous generations of Jonsbo, even the ones that included the tiny little Allen key built into the side of the facade, which would still be easy to lose. This uses standard Phillips, and the top of the casing is held in place by just 3 simple Phillips screws there at the top, and then from that you can take it apart from the inside using more Phillips screws there. So I'm glad to see the back of hex. I know not everyone's going to feel the same, but still, I love that. The only way in which you can muck this up is if you put that tray in the wrong way. I've already done it myself several times, because the grommets don't go into any particular alignment and there's no arrows denoting which way this tray goes up. So although you may have easily put the drive inside that tray with the SATA facing the right way, there isn't a clear indicator at a glance which way it needs to go, and you only have to do that wrong once before breaking a SATA connector inside there. Additionally, I will highlight that when you do install PCIe cards inside this system, that last bay there is pretty tight. On most motherboards, that will probably be a ×4 slot anyway, and if you were using things like a graphics card, which is already going to fill 2 bays, you should be okay. But even then, the distance between this and side-mounted fans, which are going to be less of an issue if you're using a fan-mounted card, of course, it's just something worth bearing in mind if you're going to fully populate all of the PCIe slots. The spacing there, if you're going to install a fan, is pretty bloody tight. And talking of tight, if you do go ahead and install an MATX board inside here, again, as mentioned, it's pretty tight around the edges. If you go for an ITX or an MATX, you're going to be laughing. But inside here, the spacing for an MATX, they've not left a huge amount of room. And one of the main areas of that is going to be with regards to that PSU. As mentioned, I installed a fairly chunky ATX inside here, but the ATX PSU sits right above the motherboard. And therefore, when you've got that ATX in this slot here, the amount of room afforded to your CPU cooler is going to be drastically reduced, and you're going to have to look at motherboards that have got much smaller scale or low profile cooling mechanics in place. That said, when I had the device all set up and all ready to rock, I will say with the 9 bays inside, it performed great. Now obviously that's going to be heavily dependent on the motherboard you choose to use. Me using that W680 board, I should say, I was able to get well in excess of 2 gigabytes per second performance from a RAID 0 across 9 7200 RPM hard drives inside there. Again, that was using Crystal Disk. I got 2 to 2.1 gigabytes per second, both read and write. No limitations really that the case can bring. Is really going to come down to your motherboard, your SATA controller, and the lanes it has been given internally. But what about noise? This is a big metal case. This is going to make some racket, right? Well, I did 4 separate noise tests just to see how things would go. So remember, we've got our our manual fan control if we choose to. And then, of course, we've got software fan control if we like. But number one, I went ahead and had the drives in complete idle, not being accessed at all. And I had the fan set to number 1, the lowest state. And noise levels hit around 37 to 39 dBA. Keeping the fans at their lowest, and then went ahead and did some access to the drives in that RAID 0 environment, and that made the noise creep up to around 41 to 44 dBA, with the majority of the noise clearly coming out of the rear of the casing. Now, mid-level with the fans set to 2 and the drives being accessed, noise went up to about 42 to 43, so it was a small little increase from the low hard drive access test before. And finally, with the fans set to 3, the highest setting, and the drives being accessed, the noise level here around 43 to 44 dBA. Again, not too shabby. If I'd added more fans, of course, it would have been different. If I'd used even more aggressive drives, it would have been different as well. But ultimately, I was really happy with the noise. And in terms of heat, when I had this up and running for about 2.5 days, I then did a measurement just to see how it was dissipating heat very well. The drive inside was sat quite comfortably with sporadic access around 25 to 28 during idle periods. Now, during the cool-off period, when I wanted to see dissipation, after about 10 minutes of the system being accessed, the temperatures read as follows. The front of the system, the top front panels around 27 degrees, with the hard drives and the space in between at around 42.3 at the PCB at the rear there. So not the drives, but the rear background. The top of the casing and the side sat around 26.5 degrees, and when we turn the system around, the PSU sat around 41.8 to 42 degrees, and the rear paneling where the back of that PCB and the fans and the cabling was sat at around 42 degrees. So again, nice temperature numbers for a 9-bay case there. Again, a lot of aggressive cooling on there. Ultimately, it left me pleased. And that's really it. The Jonsbo N6 delivers on everything it says it's going to do. It is a little pricey at the moment at launch, but much like other Jonsbos, it will go down in price over time. The cooling, the noise, the ease of setup. This has been one of the smoothest Jonsbo builds I've ever had. And the fact that it's not limited to ITX boards like the first 4 generations of Jonsbo is going to be pleasing to me. The fact they've integrated an actual fan control is about bloody time, and I'm really pleased to see it. The fact they've integrated trays, they could be better, they could be lockable, they could be, click and load trays, but at least they're there and way better than those grommets they had before. The opportunity for scale out cooling across the chassis all the way around it, and the flexibility in PSU deployment all leave me really, really happy about this system. And obviously a lot of the leveraging of this for your NAS server is going to be about the Mobo, but as cases go, I still don't think this is better than the N5, but if you thought the N5 was a bit OTT, but you liked it in principle for all the other reasons, this is a great alternative. And factoring in those extra bays really makes it up for it in terms of how we've negatively kind of viewed other Jonsbos previously and what few faults we've realistically found. I just hope the pricing sorts itself out soon. But what do you guys think? Is this a case you're going to go for? Do you own the N5 and wonder if it was too big for your needs? Do you want me to make a build video about this? Let me know in the comments. Apart from that, thank you so much for watching. There are links below to get hold of this case for yourselves. I've listed a few different retailers and outlets, and if you use those links, it will result in a small commission coming here to NAS Compares, allowing me and Eddie to keep doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.